Hi, my name's Ski Oakenfull and I'm lead course developer and instructor here at Point Blank Music School in East London. Today I'm super excited to have in front of me the second incarnation of Ableton's Push controller. Coinciding with an update to the live software 9.5, Ableton have answered our prayers and introduced waveform manipulation within Push, which means you can spend even less time looking at your computer while you're making beats. Combine this with a beautiful high-res colour screen, sampler warping, new filter types and a preview function, and it's all looking very exciting. If you want to learn how to use Ableton Live, then don't forget to check out our courses at www.pointblanklondon.com. So, without further ado, let's check out Push 2. So, it looks like Ableton have listened to their users and made some big improvements. As I mentioned before, there's been an update to the software, now version 9.5. This is required to use Push 2 and facilitates the new features. So let's start by looking at the unit. So it's basically the same size, slightly thinner, slightly deeper and a little bit lighter, I think. The buttons on the side are flatter and more responsive, and I think generally a bit brighter, although that is something that you can change in the setup mode. It has the same look. We have the screen here, which is now a beautiful multicoloured high-res screen. And to me, it kind of has a similar font to the Teenage Engineering OP1 synth. And of course it now allows a lot more information to be displayed, certainly a lot more than Push 1. Now let's look at the button layout. The most noticeable change now is this: we have to have a single row of buttons underneath the screen, and this is used for selecting tracks and applying mute and solo and stop clip. So I'll just quickly demonstrate that to you. We have our mute and solo and stop clip buttons on the left hand side now. So whichever is the selected track, just press mute or solo and it does it to that track. And alternatively, if you hold down mute, you can actually mute multiple tracks and unmute them as well. In the second row of buttons that used to be below the screen is now moved above the screen, and these allow you to access the different editing levels and select devices in the chain. We'll see how that works a little bit later on. We have an additional cursor square here, and this one here is for general navigation, and we have one here as well which changes the octaves and scrolls through the pages. We now have a new mix button. This takes the place of Push 1's track, volume, pan and send buttons. If I press it now, the screen here shows these levels, and we can flick between volume, pans and sends just using this top row of buttons. The tempo and swing knobs, together with the tap tempo, metronome, delete and undo buttons, have all moved to the top as well. So one of the great improvements now with this new screen is the browsing, and it's a far more pleasurable experience. If we look here, we can see, obviously there's more space to show all the patches and samples, and we now have a preview facility, which is something that we wanted for a long time. So you can actually audition these samples and patches. So I can just demonstrate that now. I just go to user files. This is my library, some of my samples. Just scroll through. Let's find a drum loop. And when it actually finds a sample, there we go. Really great. So let's just choose one. So we want that one. We just load it, and it actually loads it instantaneously, and it actually puts it into a simpler. And now this is something we're going to talk about in a minute, but there's a great new facility, or showing off the sampling facilities of this Push 2. So just for the moment, I'm going to delete this simpler. So let's talk about one of the most important new buttons on Push 2, which is the Convert button. This is tied in with the new sampling capabilities of Push 2. And what it does, it takes a currently selected clip and converts it into a simpler. So let's just try that. I've got a beat here. Actually, if I press clip, you can actually see a representation on the screen of the waveform. So if I just press convert, and it says convert beat to simpler, it's actually a question. I'm going to click on simpler and go on to note mode and then device, and what it's done is it's actually put this sample into a simpler. So what we can do now is we can get the start and end points and actually loop it up. So we've got a zoom here, which is great. So we can really get in tight with the transients and get exactly the start and end points. Let's just do the same here. I'm just going to zoom out a bit so we can just get that end point. There we go. Just zoom in. Again, let's just get that exact point. I'm just going to check the start point again as well. There we go, so we've got a great loop going on there. Now another thing that's really exciting is the real-time warping or time stretching. So let's get into that. All I need to do is just press this top button here where it said simpler, go over to warp and just put warp on. There we go, and it's warped it to the tempo. We can test that out. We can just, there we go, so you can see it's perfectly synced to the tempo. So let's try recording that in. There we go, so this is extremely useful. So both the simpler and the sampler have had an overhaul to allow waveform manipulation in Push. And they've also added two new sample playback modes, one shot and slice. And the original one is now called Classic, which just allows the conventional looping. So slice mode is definitely very significant and extremely useful for chopping up beats. Before we just had the slice to MIDI function within the clip. So if we take this beat now and we just go to the main section, and over here, this is where you can choose between classic, one shot and slicing. And once you put it over to slicing, you can see that it's actually sliced up all those transients and put them across some pads. So this is fantastic. Alternatively, rather than just using the built-in slicing, you can actually set the slices yourself. So we can just test that out by putting the sensitivity down to 0 and then turning on this function here, which is pad slicing. And what this allows you to do is to, if you just hold down the first pad here and then just select in time the empty pads here, you can actually set your own slices. So let's try that out now. There we go. And of course you can then go in, and if you want to adjust the start point of any of these slices, you can just go in, let's just zoom in there, we can just nudge the start point in, there we go. But I think I actually did quite a good job there. So that's slicing mode, it's very, very handy, and what you can actually do as well, once you've created those slices, you can hit convert again, and you can actually convert that into a drum rack, so you can then get into a bit more detail, adding effects to individual slices or whatever. So. But I won't do that for the moment. So yes, let's just put that back to the classic mode. There we go. So there are some great effects that you can achieve with warping. One of these is glide mode, and what this does is it allows you to change the pitch while the sample is playing. So let's just demonstrate that. I'm just going to go back to the session view here. Let's just mute the beat for the moment. So I'm going to go through the same process. I've selected this clip, I'm going to hit convert, and it's going to convert it to a simpler. Just click on device, and same thing, I'm just going to set this start point. Let's just go over to note mode. There we go. There we go, let's just get the end point. So I'll just zoom in a little bit just to make sure I've got the start there and the end point. So again, I'm going to hit the simpler key so all the editing functions come up, and I'm just going to increase the gain a bit. So let's just turn it up a bit. Again, I still need to fine-tune the start and end points. Then I'm going to go over to the warp mode, turn it on. Just to be sure, I'm just going to warp as one bar to make sure that it's actually warping. Now, so if we look at this glide mode now, if I go to global and then select glide here in the glide mode, what it means is that as you're holding down this first pad, if you then hit another pad to pitch it up or down, it keeps the same point in the sample but pitches it up. Very handy. So if I just now go back to mix, I'm just going to unmute this beat. So I can just record that in. Warping can also be very useful for creating harmonies with vocal samples especially. So I've got a vocal sample here.
I'm in love with you.
So if we go into the device,
I'm in love with you.
hit simpler there, and just go to the warp mode. Now if we choose the Complex Pro warp mode, that means we can actually adjust the formants. So
I'm in love with you. I'm in love. I'm in love.
So this sounds like it's, well, maybe here is the original pitch, but if we go up, it starts sounding really Mickey Mouse. If we put the formants up to 100, it retains the actual timbre of the waveform.
I'm in love. I'm in love with you.
So you can create some really interesting harmonies.
I'm in love with you. Want you to love me too.
Loads of fun to be had there, it's really exciting. Just going back to the Live 9 update, there's a couple of extra things they've added to that. One of these are new filter types, and these have been incorporated into devices like the auto filter and also some of the synth devices as well. So at the moment there are 4 new filter types. We've got the MS2, OSR, SMP and PRD. And they're all based on some classic designs. I think the MS2 is a Salon key Japanese mono synth, and the OSR is an Oscar mono synth. So let's just have a quick listen to those. I'm just going to go back here, and I've just got an operator. Let's go into the device. And this is where you can select the filter circuit. This is the Oscar. We have a shaper type as well, and the drive function as well. So it's a really nice feature. You'll also see on the screen we now have peak RMS metering, which is something that's been wanted for a long time. And finally, there's also auto colouring of the tracks, which is very useful. So all these changes initially might upset your muscle memory if you're very used to push 1, but certainly after a day or so, you know, you'll probably get used to it, and certainly I've found it's a lot more intuitive. So there's a very brief introduction to Push 2. No doubt there's a lot more features will come out in updates as it goes along. I'm certainly very excited and can't wait to use it more, and I'm sure you will be as well.